My MBA thesis was called The Economics of Integrating Computers and Communication Systems in Canada. Ironically, I was probably the original person to envision the internet. Yeah, and so like if you think about it, economics integrating computers and communication systems in Canada, and that the whole concept of like all of a sudden I thought of this 15 years later. Gee, I guess I was the original guy who kind of got it. Like I was originally a programmer with IBM. So, I go back a long way in that regard. And then I did a book that sold 95,000 copies that was called Preparing a Successful Business Plan. Like that was a self-counsel book, and hugely successful. And my wife was part of the, let's say, driving force in terms of that book. Born in Hamilton, Ontario, he came west to attend graduate school at UBC, and was first attracted to writing his MBA thesis when his story was published in 3 parts in Canadian Business Magazine. And I just realized that I hadn't read this for 25 years. And when I published this book, it was 20 years ago. And so this would have been 2005 that I finished, like, in the early morning hours. And then Darlene Nickel, who was a lovely person, and she was kind of helped me, encouraged me to write the book. And then she like, I'm just shocked in terms of thinking, I did this 20 years ago. Yeah, I just loved writing. I did. And I was inspired by Jim Douglas because Jim, I guess Jim was a very appealing character. And so I said to him, wow, I'm just kind of bouncing off the walls, but I love BC, and I just want to explore it. And then he said, well, you write well, because, he had probably seen a business report. And so I just kind of brainstormed, and I said, well, I've been to Vancouver Island. I love it there. And I'd like, it's a fascinating place, and I would love to just explore the history of it. And so I went to the archives, and I dug into it, and I just pitched it. I said, I think it would be an interesting story. And he bought it. And I didn't ask for an advance. I didn't ask for anything. I just was enthused to document my passion for the fascination of Vancouver Island. But the original hardcover edition had sold 10,000 copies. So it was hugely successful. Going back to Jim Douglas, and he and I were pals. Like, he recruited me to become his own, his business manager. And I designed a whole accounting system, and it's probably the same accounting system that is a D&M, like in the sense that, and then I had, I don't know, I guess I was always inspired by Jim Douglas, and he was a remarkable fellow. Jerry Potts was the first one. Like, I did the original research because it had to start with the RCMP. And the RCMP was a disaster. Like the Colonel French, and I was harsh on him. French was a disaster. And Potts, like a guy named McLeod, he was the savior because he found Jerry Potts, and Jerry Potts steered the Mounties to a place where they could gain shelter and survive. And it was a fascinating story. He was a gunfighter, and he was a cocky guy who used to, and he had a friend who they'd liquor it up, and then they'd take crack shots at each other with an apple on their head, so to speak, and so it's pretty colorful. And then it was kind of like I wanted to, I said, well, I need to make a movie, but I never been able to make a movie. I should show you this book because that's the Edward Curtis book, and Edward Curtis Above the Medicine Line, and it's a true Canadian story, and his vision and his respect for the indigenous peoples of Canada in particular. I regard the work that you have done as one of the most valuable works which an American could do now. Your photographs stand by themselves, both in their wonderful artistic merit and in the value as historical documents. President Theodore Roosevelt are indeed indebted to Edward Curtis for his work in documenting some of our traditions in this early film. To see our old people as they looked in those early days is very special. We continue to learn by watching the dance movement and the expert paddling in this film. And he was trusted by the indigenous people, the Nuchalnis, the Kwakwakwa, the Salish, and he, so he would hear stories. He would hear the oral history and the traditions, and then he would document them. And he was respectful, but candid. His whole emphasis was paying tribute to the integrity of this majestic people. And he, I think, is legitimately the reason that they were treated as well as they were. And the photographs that are all in the Royal Museum are all over the place. Is that the majesty and the dignity that he managed to capture in terms of the people. That's why I wrote this book, because he was a greatly admirable person, and he deserves this book and this story. And I had good fortune. 27 years later, here we are, and have had a very successful company. And I've always take pride in the fact that for 27 years, I've been able to write royalty checks to all of the different authors on time, and just put beans in their jeans.